Well, brace yourself, boys and girls. Looks like the old boy wants to fight fire with fire. Alright, hit me. Right, so the first one is he brings up the point that personal opinions don't make something facts. And this is true, but let's just put this one aside for just a moment because it's going to become relevant very shortly. Next he talks about economics, well, sort of. He states that the Austrian school is not universally accepted. Well, yeah, but what it really is. There's no such thing as any idea that's universally accepted. I mean, the theory of evolution isn't universally accepted. Even the Earth being round isn't universally accepted, so I really don't see how that's an argument either way. But it really gets weird when he goes on to say that just because you believe in the Austrian school doesn't mean he has to believe in it, basically implying that what economic theory you believe in is all a matter of opinion. Interesting. Now this just gets really strange. He goes, this one is quotations. The quotations are not a substitute for arguments. Well, I won't deny I use quotations on occasion, but I really would hardly say that I rely on them. In fact, I don't know of any libertarian or anarchist who does rely on them. So, who exactly are you referring to with this? So, this is not really a logical fallacy anyway. Just because it's a quotation doesn't make it more or less valid. It's just a fancier way of getting a message across. So, all this really is saying that you don't like when people do that, which is a personal opinion. Okay, so the number 4 logical fallacy that libertarians supposedly commit is making logical fallacies. No. Well, there's a hunk of logic there if I ever saw one. And once again, strangely devoid of any specific examples. Brace yourself, boys and girls, it's only going to get more ironic from here. Okay, next one is conversational terrorism, or as I call it, character assassination. Now, let me just make one thing very clear here. Let's say, take the example of state schooling, just for the heck of it. Okay, so the libertarian will make the accusation, if you support state schooling, then you support people being robbed at gunpoint to pay for the education of others. And the statist will argue that to the libertarian that if you oppose state schooling, and then you want the kids to be uneducated. Well, there's a very big difference between these two accusations. One is based on fact, and one is not. You see, when you argue that the libertarian wants the kids to be uneducated, all you're really doing is presuming to read his mind, and unfortunately that's not a terribly convincing argument. But when the libertarian argues that you support people being robbed at gunpoint to pay for state schooling, that is absolutely true. That is what taxation is. Taxation is money taken by force. If you try to deny this, well then I challenge you to stop paying taxes and see what happens. Now if you want to argue that taxation is moral, go ahead, but don't try to argue that taxation is voluntary, because then you're just guilty of trying to spin facts. Oh, here we go again. Love it or leave it. Why do they keep whipping this out? I've already explained in grave, excruciating detail why this is a completely bullshit argument. And here's another one. Okay, so it's just the old social contract thing. So basically, this invisible, imaginary social contract that you never signed says you have to obey the government, and if you don't like it, all you have to do is move away, or someone else will whip out their invisible, imaginary social contract that you never signed and claim you have to obey it. So, technically, you don't even have the option of leaving it. So, it's bullshit on multiple fronts. I don't even know how many more ways I can explain this to you. And if you still insist that this is a valid argument, well then, this invisible imaginary contract that you never signed states very clearly that your head resembles that of a chicken, and if you dispute this, no problem, all you have to do is leave the internet. Okay, next one, our so-called obsession with violence. I'll get to that in a second. But then he goes on to say it's no different than when a private company uses violence to make you pay your bills or whatever. What, private companies have the right to use their own armies to make you pay your debts? Since when? Yeah, since never. That doesn't happen. And no, none of us argue for that because that would be entirely self-defeating. You see, a government is defined by having the moral right to initiate force. So if we were to grant private companies the ability to do that, that would make them governments themselves. So that would be pretty stupid on our part, wouldn't it? Which is why none of us ever argued for it, and try as you might, you're not going to find any anarchist or libertarian who did argue for it. So this is a complete straw man. And secondly, no, it is not completely irrational to argue that everything the government does is backed by violence. You see, everything the government does is paid for through taxes. If you don't pay the taxes, you're sent threats in the mail. You're told to come to court. You're eventually paid a visit by people with guns if you continue to resist. And they're going to tell you, we're going to cart you off to prison for not paying money that we arbitrarily declare you owe. And if you refuse that, what do you think they're going to do? Ask nicely? For the love of Gandhi, man, think! This has been explained to you in detail over and over and over, and you continue to blow it off. You're not making any valid points like this. Okay, disregarding history. Yet more I know you are, but what am I? But let's take a look here. You talk about how a lot of these ideas were tried before, and yet you fail to provide any specific examples, proof, or citations at all, making this little more than an opinion. Oh, gee, where have I heard that before? Anyways, and meanwhile, when it was explained to you that literacy before state education had reached almost 92%, and today it is 60%, even though they spend vastly more per student than they did back then, you blew it off. When it's been explained to you that work accident policies have been criticized for being largely ineffective, you blew it off. When it was explained to you that mutual aid societies provided healthcare far cheaper and far more available than state healthcare does today, you blew it off. And when it was explained to you that governments are by far the biggest polluters in the world and thus are really not qualified to protect the environment, once again, you blew it off. Can you say projection? Next one, capitalism is perfect. Wow, straw man, and he isn't even trying to hide it this time. And then goes on with the rest, that bribery, extortion, and all this other stuff is all inevitable. And yes, that is true, but think about it. You're basically saying, I'm afraid of monopolies and exploitation, so I'm going to give the world's biggest monopoly, guns, permission to use violence, permission to imprison, permission to take whatever money they want from the populace, all to protect us from being stolen from, having violence committed against us, and yeah, in other news, I'm afraid of monsters, so I'm going to summon Godzilla to stop them. I really wish I was a two-headed mutant so I could do a double face palm, because one just cannot convey that level of insanity. And finally, number 10, conspiracy theory. Libertarians argue that the government must have doctored whatever evidence provided. I've never argued this, and since this is a response to me, I'm going to have to write this off as yet another straw man. So, and really, how could I possibly make that argument considering you never actually put any evidence forward, just like you did in this video? Nothing more than straw man projections, blanket statements, and taking some of my arguments and basically flipping them over without any backing to them. I mean, this is the best that the self-proclaimed slayer of libertarians could provide? I mean, what? Are you hoping we're gonna die of laughter? Well, I hope everyone found this as entertaining as I did. Until next time, be aware and be wise.